Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Today I'm going to do another review of a old movie serial, The Phantom from 1943, Columbia, 15 chapter serial about the famous Lee Falk comic strip character, the Falcon, who first appeared in 1936. So this is about 7 years into the strip's run. Um, Serial was produced by Rudolph C. Flothau, who also did the Batman serial in 1943, which is not as good. Did the Crime Doctor series, which were what are generally referred to as programmers. Those would be movies that usually just about an hour long, and they would pump like three, four, five of them out a year for a particular character. The Charlie Chan films were programmers, Boston Blackie, Blondie. Kind of think of them almost as a precursor to television. It was directed by B. Reeves Eason, who mostly did westerns and is sort of, well, I won't say sort of, infamous for not really giving a crap about safety. Apparently, in the Charge of the Light Brigade, which was made in 1936, there were so many horses that were injured and had to be put down that it actually caused a huge public outcry. And that's when the movie studios brought in the American Humane Society to monitor the treatment of animals on movie sets. So, not the best thing to be remembered for. So this serial stars Tom Tyler and Gene Bates. Tom Tyler, perhaps best known, especially if watch this channel, for playing Captain Marvel in the Adventures of Captain Marvel serial, often regarded as the best superhero serial that was made. It was certainly one of the best. Um, he's a pretty wooden actor. He's not a great actor. Is Tom Tyler? He was in a lot of westerns, um, but he did look the part really well. He's tall, big guy, apparently kind of clumsy, but either way. Gene Bates plays Diana Palmer, the niece in this of Professor Davidson. Now, this was a character that was in the comic strips, slightly different. Eventually, in fact, in the 70s, marries the Phantom. Um, Now, Bates had roles in a lot of film noirs and horror films, and she was actually later in a couple David Lynch films, Eraserhead and Mulholland Drive. You have Ernie Adams as Rusty Fenton, who's kind of this wormy assistant of Professor Davidson. John Bagney plays Moku, one of the natives in the picture. It's a jungle picture, so you do have a native population that are interacting with the Phantom. Frank Shannon plays Professor Davidson, probably best remembered as Dr. Zarkov in the Flash Gordon serials. He was in movies for a very long time. Now, the bad guy in the picture is Dr. Max Bremer, played by Kenneth MacDonald, who a lot of folks will recognize from Three Stooges shorts. And he played a judge a lot of times, 32 episodes in the old Perry Mason TV show, which I always thought was funny because he was always a bad guy, like in the Three Stooges and in a lot of movies. Now he's playing a judge. I guess it's sort of the type. Joe Devlin plays Singapore Smith, who runs sort of a trading post, and not a good guy, not a bad guy in the picture, and things don't go well for him. We also will later see in a later chapter a character called Tartar, who is sort of a Cossack type who rules over a kingdom that they have to go to, played by Dick Curtis, also well known from a lot of Three Stooges movies. Again, worked for Columbia, so it makes sense that they would be in this as well as the Three Stooges. So let's go into at least the opening of the plot in chapter one. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil the rest of the show much, but it's an old serial, so it's not exactly. Old serials are sort of spoiler proof in a way because if you watch them, you kind of know how they're going to work out, most of them. In the end, it's just the individual episodes that might take you by surprise. So we open up in the jungles, presumably of Bengala, which is where the Phantom takes place. Now, I guess in modern comic strips they have it located in East Africa, but it was originally located in India, and that will make sense with them sort of having a Central Asian, Afghan, kind of setting later on in the series. That wouldn't have made much sense if it was still set in Africa. So you have the arrival of Professor Davidson and his archaeological exhibit. And they're going to be trying to find this lost city that's somewhere, they don't know where exactly, but somewhere presumably in India. It's called Zolas. And so that's what they've arrived for. And we're gonna get early on this introduction to our bad guys. There's Dr. Max Brimmer. He also wants to find Zolas and use it as an air base for his unnamed country, which, since he's called Max Brimmer, is probably Germany. I mean, we're talking about 1941, so that's kind of who was causing a little trouble on the international scene at the time. So we also meet, Rusty Fenton. We meet Diane Palmer, and so this is where Brimmer kind of finds out what these people are looking for, and he wants to get involved. So he's going to be causing trouble throughout the entire series. Meanwhile, deeper in the jungle, we're going to meet the Phantom. So you got all these folks gathered around, and there's like this stone throne up on this pedestal or this dais, and then there's this massive amount of smoke, and the Phantom appears. Now, we get a close look at the Phantom, and we see that he's not a real young guy. So this is taken from the comic strips. The Phantom is a persona that is handed down from father to son. And so this Phantom is obviously quite a bit older. He's trying to rally the people about this, that, and the other. And there's an assassin in the crowd who shoots a poison dart at him. And it's not super noticeable at first, but when he descends back down into his cave hideout that's below the throne, his assistant is there, and he's obviously sick. And so he writes a letter to Cable, his son, at Melville University, to tell him that he has to come back. Now, the son in this case is named Jeffrey. Oh shoot! Now I'm going to get it wrong. Jeffrey. God. Oh, Jeffrey Prescott. Sorry, I had Palmer in my head. Jeffrey Prescott. Now, later in the comic strip, the Phantom is revealed to be Kit Walker. And there is a point in this where the Phantom uses the name Walker, but I guess at that point in time, they hadn't revealed his name. So, it might have been Jeffrey Prescott. Maybe that was an alias he was using while he was in school. So he rushes back, goes to this trading post in Saipana, which is like a little port city, I guess, in Bengala, and, meets the rest of the cast of characters. And then he goes to visit his father. He has a dog named Devil. The dog does not die. That was one of the prime things I was worried about while watching it, I will admit. Devil's pretty cool. He was a wonder dog, apparently, but he didn't do any major tricks, mostly just attacked people. My dog does that, and I didn't even have to train him. So he goes and he talks to his father, who is in fact dying, and who fills him in on everything and says, "Okay, son, it's time for you to take over for me." And so we get the scene where Prescott is putting on the Phantom costume for the first time, and taking on the role of the Phantom. And so, well, obviously, first order of business is who killed my father. Off into the jungle, and so the serial goes. And pretty soon, by the way, yeah, he's caught in quicksand and has to fight a crocodile. So it's very much what you would expect from any kind of jungle picture that you would get from Hollywood back in the day. And it's done relatively well. Apparently, the serial was not well liked by Falk, who didn't like the filming of it. It's not a great, masterpiece of art, but I think it's pretty solid as serials go. It's Columbia. The fight scenes generally not as good as they were at Republic, but not bad. Decent sets, decent costuming. I mean, it's a movie made for kids back in the day, and with all of these serials, you typically had about an hour and a half worth of material that had to be stretched over 12 to 15 episodes to keep the kids coming back to the theater every week. So any of these things, any of these serials could be significantly tightened up into a much more coherent, well flowing story than they are. But that's kind of not the point. The point was to keep the kids coming back, give them some chills and some thrills and a cliffhanger, and they were fun. And it does all of that just fine. It One notable thing, the dialogue in chapter 11, if you are watching it, had to be redubbed later in time because the original film was had deteriorated to the point that it wasn't usable anymore. I assume they worked off the original scripts. I mentioned earlier that at some point the search the serial becomes about the search for these ivory pieces of a map that will show where Zolaz is. And Professor Davidson initially has 3 of them. 3 more of them are kept in a safe that I want to say I think that was Singapore Smith had the safe. So there's a few episodes where they're going over trying to get a hold of that, Brimmer versus Davidson, although Davidson at no point knows that Brimmer is the bad guy. He's the doctor in Saipan, and most people seem to trust him, foolishly, I guess. And it ultimately comes about finding the 7th piece, the middle of the map, so they can figure out where Zolaz actually is. And that turns out to be in the possession of Tartar, who rules this sort of Afghan-looking kingdom, although some of his soldiers have costumes that look like maybe 16th century Europe. It was really just like, what can we find prop-wise, costume-wise in Colombia, and just kind of throw it together. So played by Dick Curtis, and really kind of interesting. He's sort of, initially like, why have you intruded on my kingdom? And then he's like, well, ally I'll help you. Well, then maybe I won't. And finally, in order for the Phantom to get that last piece of the map and ally himself with Tartar, he has to fight a gorilla. So you put a guy in a gorilla costume in a movie, I'm about 75% of the way there to liking it. In fact, Ray Crash Corrigan plays the gorilla, as he often did in these movies. And so, what happens? Do they find Zolaz? Do the good guys win, or do they maybe lose? I won't spoil it for you, but I think you probably do know. But overall, it was an enjoyable piece of work. I had fun with it. Now, rating wise for these kind of movies, I have my own system because, again, it's really difficult to rate the plot, the storyline. They oftentimes are very similar to one another. They have silly twists in them because they have to, again, fill up 12 to 15 episodes. Obviously, if you're rating it as just a movie, you're comparing it to like Citizen Kane and the Maltese Falcon. It's crap. It's horrible. Okay, but that's not how we're going to rate these things. We're looking at them for what they are, for fun kids films from the old days with action and adventure and maybe a little comedy. You have to sort of, rank them in their own right and not compared to other kinds of movies. So I got my own little system. Number 1, costume. If we're talking superhero type movies, costume is big, and I give this a 5 out of 5. Costume looks great. He looks great in it. And, for just the overall character, they actually stick pretty close to the comic strip. They don't go too far outside of its bounds. The origin is pretty standard to what you would expect for the Phantom. So they do a pretty good job in terms of adaptation, so I'll give them credit for that. The fights, decent, but they're not fantastic. I enjoyed the dog getting in there and, ripping up a few people. But the fights are okay, but they weren't something that just really, caught my attention like in the Captain America serial. I think those are some of the best fights ever in a serial. These are fine. I give it a 3 out of 5 for fights. Gadgets, I got to go about a 2 out of 5 because, frankly, there's not a lot of gadgets to be found in the movie. The Phantom's not really that kind of character, so it might be unfair, but hey, the weird gadgets, weird secret headquarters are kind of a fun part of these things. Now, while his headquarters was not necessarily all that cool, it was more or less a cave with some furniture in it. The little bit where you have the throne and then whoo, all this smoke, and then when the smoke clears, the Phantom is sitting there, and he disappears the same way. That I rather like, so I'll give it a 2 out of 5 instead of a 1 out of 5. The villain, Dr. Brimmer is acceptable as a villain. He doesn't have some crazy costume. He's certainly not over the top. And, if you could give him points for that, I suppose, anyways. But, McDonald was not a dynamic actor either. He doesn't play it up. He's pretty straightforward. He would actually probably be a great villain in a less childish movie. But as it is, he's a little bit boring. I like the fact that they don't know he's the villain, and there's almost a part of me that does kind of respect the fact that he isn't appearing in some crazy hood and calling himself the Scorpion or something. But for this kind of movie, it's also a little bit boring. So I got to go a 2 out of 5 for the villainy. It's acceptable, but it didn't get me going. So overall, that gives the Phantom a 3 out of 5 rating as a serial. It's worth a watch. If you're a big fan of the Phantom, maybe it'll hit harder for you. Maybe not. Maybe it will be a problem for you. But it's a decent flick. It's worth watching. I had fun with it. There's a few of these I've watched where I'm kind of dreading it, like going, oh God, do I have to watch another one of these? It's not really getting any better. I enjoyed watching these. They were fun. But I wouldn't call it top of the line for these kind of things. For that, I still got to go Captain Marvel. I think that was a much more fun serial. Had crazy gadgets, had a great costume. Tyler was actually a little bit more dynamic, charismatic in this than he was as the Phantom. Although, again, he rates pretty low on the dynamism scale, but he was a little more lively as Captain Marvel than as the Phantom, but he did look great as the Phantom. You got to give him that. And he looked great as Captain Marvel, too. Looks-wise, this dude was perfect for this kind of stuff. Just acting-wise, not so good. Pretty wooden. But I still got to say Captain Marvel overall, I would say, is a better serial. But, hey, give Phantom a check or a look. It's worth checking out. I overall enjoyed it, but it's not one of the greatest serials probably ever made. So, with that, we will wrap up Dad's Den today. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. Maybe think about subscribing to the channel, maybe sharing with a friend. In the meantime, God bless everybody. Sorry, I'm looking at my little button there, what I need to push when I end this thing, because I'm so incredibly professional. God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another, as the Phantom would have you do, and try to have some fun out there. And I'll see you next time in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.